Who here in this room thinks that their blood contains harmful chemicals? Not many of you. According to NIH.gov, quote, one report by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey found PFAS in the blood of 97% of Americans, end quote. This likely comes as a shock to most after hearing you have potentially harmful chemicals in your blood. This is a pretty justifiable reaction. Regardless of your reaction to learning this, I would like to go more in depth on these harmful chemicals, more commonly known as PFAS. The next logical question would be, what exactly are PFAS, and why should we care? To answer this, we should look at where PFAS originated. In 1951, 3M developed a chemical that nothing would stick to and sold it to several different companies that would put the chemical into regular household items, such as non-stick pans. Companies continued to use PFAS for its repellent properties and disposed of the waste by dumping it into groundwater areas, where it finds its way into the population for years to come. Legislation cracked down on the chemical after proof was found out about its harmful and long-lasting effects. So if PFAS are illegal, why do they still exist today? The same companies that used these chemicals before the ban invented new ones with identical properties just different enough to be legal. As someone who lives in the United States and uses several of the numerous products that contain PFAS, I believe that everyone in this room should research what enters their body. I have researched this issue extensively and believe I have reached a level of knowledge to discuss this topic. In addition to this, I believe that corporations should not be able to continually use loopholes in PFA bans to practice activities that would otherwise be illegal. As of the year 2021, we see companies continue to manufacture, distribute, and dispose of PFA variants in a way that negatively impacts everything and everyone. To stop this, policies like California's 2008 SCP law should be implemented on a federal level to warn consumers. After setting the stage, I would now like to go further in depth on why you should be concerned about PFAS and what can be done to address the issue on a legislative level. Most of the research on PFAS comes from independent studies, which is part of the reason that EPA has not been able to crack down on the issue of the chemical. To paraphrase academic journal published in 2021, the EPA banning individual PFAS results in the companies regulating themselves because the existing regulations are not enforceable and do not discourage these companies from ignoring them completely or just creating new PFAS. Despite this, state legislators in California are working on passing regulatory policies that prevent the use of all PFAS and products in any form. As many of you probably don't see this as an issue that would immediately impact you, so you might be asking yourself the following question: why should we be concerned about PFAS? There is an increasing number of reasons as why you should be concerned about PFAS and the public health impacts that they have. One of the most alarming health concerns of PFAS, according to a 2021 research study, is, quote, few associations were noted between PFAS and angiogenetic barriers, end quote. As previously mentioned, 99.7% of the global populations have PFAS in their bodies, so this issue impacts everyone. According to an article published in 2021, quote, PFAS half-life estimates about from serial blood sampling and from D19 to D63 data were not significantly different, end quote. This means someone who has been long dead could turn into a biohazard if they were ever cremated, regardless of which PFAS were in their body. There are about 4,700 different kinds of PFAS in existence today, and that number is growing as industry regulations change. PFAS find their way into our clothing, food, and in some cases, tap water. All of these act as delivery methods to enter our bodies, where they can accumulate over time and increasingly toxic levels. So, what can we do to deal with existing PFAS and create new ones from being created? I propose that we implement legislation like the 2008 Safer Consumer Products Law found in California to prevent companies from creating new PFAS when old ones are banned. According to a 2021 journal from the EHP, quote, any chemical that appears on one or more of the 23 established authoritative lists referenced in the DTSC's framework regulations is a candidate chemical under regulatory framework, end quote. The main goal of this legislation is to inform consumers of what exactly is in the products they are buying, especially the ones deemed harmful. While this does not expressly outlaw all PFAS, it is a step in the right direction of improving public safety. Some argue that such a policy would be a waste of time because PFAS are not immediately harmful, and the beneficial uses of PFAS far outweigh the negligible side effects PFAS have on humans and the environment. Another counter argument states that quote, yet regulatory processes rely on knowledge and methods that may make the regulation less likely, bolster the interest of private sector actors, and constrain public engagement, end quote. I believe these counter arguments are short-sighted and only promoted by the companies who use them as their quote-unquote cash cows. Does putting California's SEP laws on a federal level do enough? As it stands, the EPA needs to complete more in-depth research on all PFAS in order to outlaw their production, but there needs to be a more immediate solution. This specific policy will, at a minimum, inform consumers if the products they buy contain PFAS so that they can make their own decision. Outside of the products people buy, there are online resources such as awg.org/PFAS map that allow someone to check the amounts of PFAS in their tap water based on where they live. As a side note, in the article from the Journal of Applied Physics, quote, a concentration step followed by plasma treatment may be cost-effective means to treat PFAS contaminated water, end quote. While not the focus of my speech, it is important to highlight the current efforts to address the accumulation of PFAS in groundwater. The testing of these processes to break down PFAS is a critical part of the solution, but is not the focus of my speech. Finally, in conclusion, I would like to say that this multifaceted issue is likely to remain for years to come. I hope that what I have discussed today will inspire all of you to fight for a solution and research the issue for yourselves. The current regulations surrounding PFAS are weak and easily worked around by the companies that use them. In order to ensure public safety, we need to regulate PFAS so that the corporations that use them cannot simply make another one. I suggest that a policy modeled after the 2008 SCP law in California be implemented on a federal level in the interest of public safety. This policy directly addresses the issues of PFAS by banning all of the chemicals that possess the characteristics of an existing PFA. Finally, I encourage all of you to further explore PFAS on your own. They're a permanent part of you after all.